As with so many books by Anthony Browne, Willy's Stories is comprised of more than meets the eye. Willy, our adventurous narrator, shows up in several other Browne books, including Willy and the Cloud and Willy the Dreamer. Dedicated readers of Browne will know that whatever happens to Willy next, it won't be boring. This book also utilizes Browne's usual style of using anthropomorphized animals to tell his tale. From the very first opening, we see that books will become an important motif within the story. Images always occur on the right side of the opening, and text always occurs on the left, separated by the spine. This could indicate to a reader a separation between the written word and the word of the image. On the left side of the first opening, we see that the first letter of the first sentence is placed on top of a book in the same pattern as Willy's sweater vest from the front cover. This signifies that this book is Willy's and that we are reading his stories. The right side of the first opening catches our eye with a full bleed image of Willy walking away from the reader through two double doors into a bright light. The double doors are surrounded by bricks that are made out of books, and the books are surrounded by darkness. This image is only one of two full bleed images in the entire book. This is significant. In this instance, the full bleed image makes us feel like we are in the picture. This signifies to the reader that Willy is leaving the real world behind and in the darkness to go into something unknown. From the second opening to the 11th opening, each opening signifies a different classic piece of literature. We notice that the images on the right side of the opening are framed by a thick white frame and then a thin colored frame in the center of the page. This gives each illustration almost a portrait-like quality to it. The color of the frame seems to change to better correspond to each image, but might also signify the fact that each image is part of its own story. We could see these images set into a leather-bound classic piece of literature, couldn't we? As we said about the page and spine separation, this separation from the words and from the reader indicate that Willy is no longer a part of the real world. He has entered the literary world and now must deal with all the adventure and danger that it brings with it. On the right side of the second opening, we see Willy standing on a beach in front of a towering palm tree made of books. Willy is staring at a large footprint. He is joined by a tiny dog cowering behind the book palm tree. Could this be the dog from Voices in the Park? Browne is famous for adding elements from previous books, so I suppose he could be. Willy wears his signature sweater vest, but his pants look tattered. He wears an interesting hat and a parrot sits on his shoulder. Astute readers might realize that Willy has entered Robinson Crusoe, but others may not realize this fact. We also notice that Willy carries a gun, but not just any gun, a gun that is turning into a writing implement. As the book continues, we find that this becomes a continued motif. All weapons and tools that Willy or other characters carry seem to turn into pencils. This communicates an old adage, the pen is mightier than the sword. Knowledge is power, and if used correctly, is ultimately more powerful than any weapon. The more a person reads, the more powerful they become. On the third opening, we see a brave Willy hiding in an apple barrel, surrounded by guerrilla pirates. What kind of scrape has Willy gotten himself into now? Behind the pirates, we see that the slats on the ship are actually books, and one of the guerrilla pirates is sitting on a large tome, keeping with the motif of scenery being made out of books. We also notice that the pirate's crutch is turning into a pencil. The fifth opening of the book's illustration is the most different from all others. It is in black and white and looks to be illustrated with pencil. Willy has entered Hans Christian Andersen's The Tinderbox, and this illustrative style serves to signify the gothic horror-like feel of this tale, as well as the age of the story. If we look in the upper right-hand corner of this illustration, we see a tall, skinny book masquerading as a tree, in keeping with our book motif. We see Willy, back in his own clothes, standing at the top of an old gnarled tree that stands in the center of the frame. A cloaked figure who is standing on the ground holds one end of the rope that is tied to a worried Willy standing at the top, looking down into the tree's trunk. Willy and the rope are the only things drawn in color in this illustration. This is significant because it serves to let him stand out in stark contrast to the gray and white line drawings of this illustration. We think this signifies that perhaps Willy is not fully committed to this story. Willie looks apprehensive and almost seems to be pulling away from the cloaked figure in the foreground of the image. He isn't wearing a costume from the story, and the rope is his only tie to the action, figuratively and literally. The sixth opening shows us a very familiar image. In the center of the frame, we see a fancily clad pirate with a gold hook for a hand, surrounded by a ragtag group of little boys in a state of wonder. We also see Willie with his back towards the reader, wearing green leaves and brandishing a tiny dagger. We don't even need to see Willie's face to know that he has become Peter Pan and is fighting Captain James Hook. Both of these characters are so familiar in literary culture, we would recognize them just by their costumes. We see that Captain Hook's sword is raised against Willie/Peter and is turning into a pencil as he lifts it, and the tip of Willie's dagger is turning yellow as well. We also see that the rungs on the ladder on the left-hand side of the illustration are in fact books. Another significant feature in this illustration is the black cat in the bottom right-hand corner. In using Kress and Van Leeuwen's spatial map, we see that an image in this position represents something new. It represents adventure. I have to wonder if this cat is Dinah and if she's going to lead Willie on his next adventure down the rabbit hole. The illustration on the seventh opening is significant because it not only signifies Willie's entrance into Alice in Wonderland, but also becomes a metaphor for how Willie approaches and experiences literature as a whole. In this image, we see Willie, back in his own clothes, happily falling down from a sliver of blue sky at the top of the frame, past bookshelves full of books and knickknacks. On these shelves, we see clues indicating what story Willie has found himself in: a red rose with a dainty face, a mushroom, a drink-me bottle, an egg sitting atop a brick wall, a hidden king, a pig snout, a dodo, a key, the Cheshire Cat, a teapot and teacup, the Mad Hatter's hat, a badminton birdie, a ladder, and a flamingo and hedgehog, perfect for playing croquet. However, we also see Peter Rabbit and his prized cabbage, a moon turning into a pencil, and a regal lion who fights a white witch, perhaps. We see a hand reaching through the shelves and many other elements from other literary stories. Willie's world is full of literature, and this illustration brings all of those worlds together. I can see why Brown chose it for the dust cover. In Willie's hand, we see an open book depicting a tornado, perhaps another clue as to what our next story is. In the bottom right-hand corner of the illustration, we see the back of the White Rabbit leading Willie on to his next new adventure. The eighth opening illustration depicts a tiny house made of books with an even tinier Willie looking out through the window. A big black tornado at the center of the illustration holds Willie's house in the air above the wide open fields and scarecrows below, and this tornado will likely carry him all the way to a faraway land. Based on the clear setting and the clue from the previous page's illustration, we can surmise that Willie has found himself in The Wizard of Oz. The ninth opening depicts Willie climbing a golden rope up a never-ending wall of books to a tiny window. If we look at the background, we see a watercolor landscape. The orange-brown ground melts into the green-yellow hills and mountains. They melt into the white clouds and the blue sky. This almost impressionistic illustration style signifies that the background doesn't really matter in this story. For instance, this story could take place once upon a time in a land far, far away. What truly matters in this story is that Willie is climbing a golden rope up a tall, tall tower of books, all in order to find a beautiful, golden-haired, and angel-voiced princess imprisoned at the top. The 10th opening depicts the terror of the wild wood in The Wind in the Willows. We see Willie in the bottom center of the frame, cowering in the trunk of a tall, cracked tree. The tree is surrounded by yellow, green, and orange leaves, signifying autumn. Within the trunk, we see a set of books lodged deep in the crack. The tree itself seems to come alive as we see the knots in the wood create eyes and the breaks in the trunk becoming hungry and snarling maws. And in the multiple sets of yellow, glowing eyes tucked within the crack in the tree, and in the darkness of the woods behind the tree, you can imagine why such a sight would be terrifying. This illustration effectively succeeds in depicting the sinister feeling that Mole, and now Willie, must have felt when lost in the wild woods at the mercy of the crafty foxes. The 11th opening shows Willie, in the bottom center of the illustration, looking right at the reader as he swims away from an enormous whale with the books for teeth and pages for baleen. Willie breaks the fourth wall to accurately show his terror in this situation. He demands we look at what is happening to him and even seems to be yelling for help. In the sky, we see birds flying above the whole wide blue ocean, but if we look more closely, we see the birds are actually books, flapping their covers and pages to a new adventure and to new inquiring readers. The 12th and final opening of Willie's stories is the second of the 2 full bleed pages in the whole of the book. Willie stands front and center, surrounded by white. There's no longer a frame to keep Willie and the reader separated, or the reader separated from the story. Willie has returned to the real world, and he comes bearing a challenge. We see a full-sized Willie smiling and carrying a stack of 10 books, all of which he just led us through in the previous pages. Readers who are unable to figure out which story Willie was in get a full reading list from Willie himself. It's almost as if Willie is handing the reader his stack of books to share. From this image, we know that Willie is just beginning his literary adventures, and it's clear that Brown hopes that he and Willie have inspired the reader to begin an adventure of their own.